Okay, the final item of business this evening is a members' business debate on motion 17754 in the name of Miles Briggs on A720 Sheriffhall Roundabout. The debate will be concluded without any questions being put. I'd invite members wishing to participate to press the request to speak buttons. And I call on Miles Briggs to open the debate. Around 7 minutes. Mr Briggs.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I've got red lights flashing up on my screen here, very much like the Sheriffhall Roundabout, sadly, as well. But can I start by thanking colleagues across the Chamber for supporting my motion and allowing this debate to take place this evening. Those members who were here in 2018 will remember that this is not my first speech on the Sheriffhall Roundabout, and indeed on the Edinburgh City bypass. I've been campaigning on this issue my entire parliamentary career. The Sheriffhall Roundabout, for those unfamiliar, is the only at-grade junction on the Edinburgh City bypass, a notorious bottleneck, where commuters heading to work, visiting family members and loved ones, and businesses transporting goods regularly face gridlock. A solution, a flyover to separate local and through traffic, was agreed upon as part of the 2018 Edinburgh and South East Scotland City regional deal, a £1.6 billion partnership between the Scottish and UK governments. With an initial allocation of £120 million, this project finally promised better journeys and safer roads for Lothian and the surrounding region. Sheriffhall has been steeped in controversy from the very beginning, though. 40 years ago, when the roundabout was being constructed, many people, including people who worked on the original planning of the road, who I've met, made it clear that the roundabout was not appropriate for a bypass and would cause congestion. 17 years ago, in 2008, an upgrade to the junction was first flagged as a priority as part of the Scottish Government's Strategic Transport Projects Review. It then took 10 years for the Government to commit funding. In the 7 years since then, though, absolutely nothing has been done to alleviate the time, money and pollution being needlessly wasted by commuters every single day. In 2020, a Green Party review brought what little progress had been made to a screeching halt when they objected on environmental grounds. And the Greens have branded this junction and proposed flyover as Spaghetti Junction. But it is absolutely unclear whether or not they think traffic sitting in stationary traffic jams on the bypass and drivers opting to cut through the city centre now to avoid that traffic is better for our environment and cleaner flowing traffic confined to the outskirts of our city. Nonetheless, the public inquiry on this matter in 2023 pushed ministerial approval back even further, and the decision was expected now a year ago, yet it remains under, as the Cabinet Secretary has said, active consideration. 12 months without a decision is not consideration, it is dither and delay. So last week I asked the Cabinet Secretary for Transport whether SNP ministers would finally commit to this project before the election in 2026. So nearly 20 years and more than £6 million in consultation fees later, we have seen no further progress. The frustration is not only felt by, I know, MSPs from all parties representing the area in this Parliament, but businesses in the city and those in neighbouring communities as well, and especially the commuting public, as seen in the City Deal meeting just last week. And I know representatives of all parties sitting on that are really frustrated. And members of the Edinburgh and South East Scotland City Joint Deal Committee were rightly outraged when Transport Scotland refused to even attend their meeting. Furthermore, the committee expressed embarrassment at having been made to look ineffectual by ministers who keep delaying a decision on Sheriffhall, which is the region's, let's remember, most key flagship transport project. As a Lothian MSP, I continue to be contacted by exasperated constituents who cannot understand why such an obvious infrastructure problem has not been resolved. But this is not only an Edinburgh issue, as my colleagues will confirm, and the City Deal Joint Committee has highlighted that the A720 is integral to our economy, not only of the surrounding South East of Scotland region, but the whole of Scotland. I go back to what I said in my previous debate, that Edinburgh and the South East of Scotland are one of the key growing parts of our economy, and we need to make sure that this sees the right infrastructure investment, which is what the Sheriffhall junction is. Gridlocked trunk roads are bad for the economy and create a poor impression for inward investors and those who want to visit our area as well. Lothian has the fastest growing population in Scotland and will represent 84% of Scotland's predicted population growth over the period to 2033. Edinburgh alone is growing at nearly 3 times the rate of the Scottish average, and its economy reflects this. However, if we want to sustain that growth, we must ensure that our infrastructure is future-proofed. A report by INRIX, a transport information company, identified that the bypass as the most now congested trunk road outside of London, with 4 of the UK's worst bottlenecks located on the A720. The 2016 report predicted that the 455 traffic hotspots in Edinburgh, of which the bypass was the most, would cost the Scottish economy as much as £2.8 billion by this year alone. As I mentioned earlier, the initial budget for this project was £120 million, but that is now likely to exceed £200 to £300 million given inflation. And as my colleague Colin Beattie asked last week and didn't get the response, we don't know how much this will cost, and we need to know that from ministers. Worse still, £6.4 million has been spent on consultants for designs that remain on paper 6 years after that money has been spent. This is public money, my constituents' money, and it has been wasted on what remains a clogged road. More than 75,000 vehicles use the bypass every day already. Transport Scotland's modelling for Scotland predicts that 102,000 vehicles will be using the bypass by 2037. East Lothian and Mid Lothian are both home to major house building projects. As more and more homes are built, the pressure on transport infrastructure will only grow. So delaying the upgrade of the Sheriffhall risks making the situation even worse for all involved. We mustn't forget that there is also a safety issue at the heart of this to be considered. Sheriffhall's current design, where local and through traffic collide in a single level, is a recipe for danger and accidents, and near misses are frequent. So the proposed flyover should separate these flows, reduce congestion and improve sightlines. Deputy Presiding Officer, I'm grateful to the many constituents who have signed my campaign and also their concerns and ideas that's been expressed to me. And I acknowledge that this is not the only problem on the A720. The entire road is inadequate for our capital city to grow and is needing a wider review as well. And it's clear for anyone who uses the road that we need significant investment at both the Gogarburn and New Craig Hall roundabouts as well. A truly strategic transport system would also improve the sustainability transport options as part of that wider investment. Deputy Presiding Officer, SNP ministers have allowed this key transport project to stall. The sad truth is SNP transport ministers, and I have met with many of them over this period, have said that the upgrade of Sheriffhall is a priority for government. Yet we have not seen that taken forward. Even when the money is committed and consultations have taken place, we see the stall continue. So, Deputy Presiding Officer, to conclude, I have a lot of time for the Cabinet Secretary. I know the frustration which members across the Chamber will share at the lack of progress we have seen to deliver the upgrade to the Sheriffhall roundabout. I hope to use this debate tonight to get the project back on track and give the upgrade the green light finally to take forward what is the most strategic transport investment for the Lothian region. In responding to the debate, I hope the Cabinet Secretary can take forward a number of suggestions and provide answers. So I'd ask the Cabinet Secretary to outline why a decision is taking so long to be made by ministers, having now had the report for over a year. Can the Cabinet Secretary agree to meet cross-party going forward to try to get this project taken forward as soon as possible? And can the Cabinet Secretary this evening give Parliament an assurance that a decision will be taken before the end of this session of Parliament? And can I finally thank all members who are going to speak in this debate and look forward to hearing their contributions. Thank you.
Thank you. We move to the open debate. I call first Christine Graham to be followed by Sue Webber. Around 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I congratulate the member on securing this debate. Actually, way back before the Sheriffhall roundabout was born, Edinburgh City Council rejected pre-construction that there should be an inbuilt underpass future-proofing the roundabout, advising it wasn't worth the cost. How much easier it would have been had that gone ahead, but that was then and now is now. It is some considerable time since I first raised my concerns about the Sheriffhall Roundabout, which is a major link into and out of the Borders and Midlothian by way of the A7. It will also be used by cars travelling eastwards to the Borders and the A68, though there is now off the city bypass a slip lane to the A68. Incidentally, Midlothian is one of the fastest growing areas in Scotland. You just need to take a trip round it to see the number of homes. For over 20 years as an MSP, I've used the roundabout regularly to and from my constituency, and during the 20-plus years, traffic has worsened with long tailbacks earlier and earlier in the day. In 2018, the Edinburgh City Region deal referred to by Miles Briggs, with funding from both UK and Scottish Government, put forward grade separation with a flyover across the Edinburgh City bypass, taking the A720 north at 120 million at that time. I traced my first question in 2017 and another to 10th November 2022, when the then responsible minister confirmed that the project was progressing, with the public inquiry set for 30th of January 2023. In a later debate, I stressed the issue of the unsafe conditions for cyclists and pedestrians, the roundabout being known to cyclists as, quotes, the meat grinder, close quotes. Indeed, I've rarely seen a cyclist navigating the roundabout, and no wonder. Heaven help us if there's an accident at the roundabout, which, apart from human tragedy, would have traffic seizure and stop in all directions and all the feeder roads right into Edinburgh and beyond. While delay was in part due to the 2,773 objections, I found and still find it extraordinary that the Greens always opposed the improvement, and just recently Lorna Slater, on behalf of the Greens, on 15 January this year, before the Economy and Fair Work Committee, referred to as, in quotes, a dinosaur, close quotes, as she considered it conflicted with Scotland's climate goals, such as the aim to reduce car travel by 20%. The Greens' criticism is misplaced. No matter to them that buses from the Borders and Midlothian, the lorries delivering goods to and from the Borders and Midlothian, use that route and that roundabout because they have to. The Borders Railway cannot carry freight, not to mention police, ambulance and fire and rescue on these roads. Indeed, within the proposed design, there was to be a cycle and will be a cycle and pedestrian walkway, which I think is actually very green. Instead, we have lines of vehicles spurting out exhaust fumes as they queue for the light sequences to change. Hardly good for the environment and hardly green. That public inquiry has concluded, and while the Scottish Government, I know, remains committed to its 2018 120 million contribution to the project, it remains a fact that the independent report has been in their hands for over a year, and to some extent there has been radio silence. These are my concerns. Delay is annoying enough, but it's the inevitable inflation of costs for which the Scottish Government will be liable. That 120 million contribution is fixed. Predictions are that this will possibly be 200 million, but on past capital projects, I really think that's optimistic. So where are we with this? I support Miles Briggs and others if the Government could give us an idea as to progress and my constituents, and I'd like to hear it before I retire next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now call Sue Webber to be followed by Faisal Chowdhury. Around 4 minutes, Ms Webber.
That caught me unawares. I was clapping vociferously. Not for you retiring next year, but for getting a decision, Ms Graham, on the Sheriffhall. And I'd like to start by thanking my colleague Miles Briggs for bringing this debate to Parliament today. Sheriffhall Roundabout has been a long-standing problem, and yet it remains neglected by SNP ministers, with more than 15 years and millions of pounds spent on planning. The Sheriffhall Roundabout has cost Lothian residents countless hours of traffic and millions of pounds. And a much-needed upgrade to this notorious junction has been discussed since 2008. But there's been no tangible progress in this time, despite the £6 million spent on consultants. More than 75,000 vehicles use the bypass every day, but this is set to increase since Lothian has the fastest growing population in Scotland and is forecast to account for 84% of Scotland's predicted population growth over the period to 2033. And that includes also Mid Lothian and East Lothian and all the surrounding local authorities. But under the SNP Green Scottish Government, the project totally stalled. This key piece of infrastructure brings Edinburgh bypass to a standstill every rush hour. But if the junction was to be successfully upgraded, this would hugely benefit people across Edinburgh and the Lothian region. It's only 7 years since the Edinburgh City Region deal was signed, with the support of all the local authorities and both the Scottish and UK governments. And now that's worth £1.6 billion. The agreement should really accelerate economic growth and prosperity. And the one element that's been missing has been the upgrading of that Sheriffhall junction. A flyover solution we've heard about was proposed by Transport Scotland, and it should be progressing. Designs for the much-needed flyover are available. Funding's been in place, but 7 years ago we're no further forward because the Scottish Government and the Edinburgh Council were in such a thrall to the Green Party's anti-car agenda. A review of the project was ordered in 2020 when Edinburgh's SNP Labour administration was frankly drunk with power during lockdown, blocking streets and narrowing roads in a hidden agenda to make driving as difficult as possible. And having already accepted the need for improvement in the City deal, the SNP Scottish Government then bent to the Green Party's will by agreeing to the public inquiry in 2023. Sheriffhall overarching objectors SHU got the Scottish Government to hold a public local inquiry earlier this year, following 2,771 objections to the scheme's draft orders. And it's come to light that a high proportion of these objections, which sparked the hearing, were submitted through the Scottish Green Party website, according to Transport Scotland. The resulting report was delivered to SNP ministers a year ago, and since then, nothing. Except we now know that £6.4 million has been spent on consultants to produce designs. We're no further forward, and Transport Scotland failed to appear at the City Region Deal Committee last week to provide a really essential update on the continued delay in progressing the Sheriffhall upgrade. The delay... briefly.
Stephen Kirby.
I think it's worth noting, for the record, that there are actually no Scottish Greens in the chamber to listen to this debate.
Sue Webber.
They might well be online, working from home or something. I'm not sure, but they should be here because they're frankly at fault for causing this delay. And this delay is having a massive impact on the south-east of Scotland's economy. It's impacting on 42,000 vehicles a day, and commuters are delayed an average of 30 minutes a day. And as Christine Graham rightly said, spurting out those fumes is hardly green. So after successive delays caused by the Green opposition and SNP complacency, it is time for the Government to commit to a deadline and budget for this project before costs spiral further out of control. My colleague Miles Briggs has launched an online petition for work to start without further delay, and I do hope it persuades the Cabinet Secretary to really get a move on. There's only 1 year left in Holyrood, Ms Hislop, so I would be delighted if we were able to sign off by delivering something of genuine benefit to Edinburgh, the Lothians and the Borders.
Thank you. Always through the chair. Faisal Chowdhury, to be followed by Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I join members in congratulating Miles Briggs on bringing this issue to the Chamber. Anyone who uses the A720 city bypass for commuting or travel will agree on its importance. They, like me, will have spent hours slow-moving, congested traffic, faced frustration at longer journey times, and wondered why no progress has been made on delivering a great separated junction at Sheriffhall Roundabout. It has been clear for a while that change is needed. Sheriffhall was named Scotland's most dangerous roundabout and topped the Roundabout League of Shame in 2019. Mid Lothian and East Lothian are Scotland's fastest growing local authorities, expecting to grow their population by 15 and 7.2%. That will bring more cars, more congestion and more accident if nothing changes. The A720 is also a strategically important road for Scotland's economy. It connects Edinburgh with our largest trading partners in England and connects to one of our busiest cargo airports in Edinburgh Airport. We must ensure our infrastructure is a positive factor in driving growth and enable people and goods to move freely and easily. Upgrading Sheriffhall will enable that to happen over the coming decades, where tens of thousands of will continue to use the bypass and junctions, even as we progress to net zero. The next of the motion notes that, the text of the motion notes that motorists have been waiting 7 years for construction to begin. But the needs for a flyover was the first identified in the Strategic Transport Projects Review in 2008. The same points, that a flyover will contribute to road safety and reduce emission, were made then too. The proposal being considered by ministers will not only achieve those goals, but allow work on the proposed extension of Edinburgh trams and orbital bus routes to progress. Active travel is also included in the proposal. But ultimately, that cannot happen if the progress is not made. I recognise that process must be followed. But 7 years since a commitment was made with no spades in the ground or timeline decided is not acceptable. There is also now doubt over the 120 million costing. This speaks to a wider issue with a planning system that is holding Scotland back and undermining investment in all areas of our economy. We are discussing Sheriffhall today, but we have to be clear that this is by no means an isolated case. Presiding Officer, today I'm hoping for a transparency from the Scottish Government on funding. I want them to reaffirm their commitment to this project and commit to a timeline for its completion, for safety, the economy and road users. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Chowdhury. And I call the final speaker in the open debate, Alexander Stewart, in 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to be able to speak in this important issue in this debate, and I congratulate my colleague Miles Briggs for bringing this debate to the Chamber this evening. And I also commend him for the launch of the campaign and the petition to finally deliver the much-needed upgrades for the Sheriffhall Roundabout. The continued delay of these upgrades is unacceptable, and the impact it's having on residents, on commuters and on businesses is continuing to increase year on year. Over 75,000 vehicles use the Edinburgh bypass every day. We've heard that already from a number of speakers. With Lothian still seeing rapid population growth, the number is only going to get bigger and higher as we progress. While the need for the solution is vitally important, and it's becoming more urgent, but it's very clear that it's a low priority on the government's priority list and has been for some time. Miles' big motion speaks about how we've been waiting for years to see Transport Scotland provide a flyover situation and solution to this area. However, the problem Sheriffhall is being exacerbated because of the length of time it's taking. And we've known for this for decades. The flyover has been talked about by numerous MSPs over numerous terms within this Parliament, and as yet it still hasn't progressed to the levels we want to. This was first brought to the attention of the SNP when they joined government in their first year. We also know that over £6 million has already been spent on consultants' fees alone, and that's a complete and utter waste of time, effort and money, and not getting a solution. The situation is continuing, as I say, to cause real issues across Edinburgh. Commuters from across the Central Belt and other parts of the south east of Scotland also are disrupted by the Sheriffhall, and it as a bottleneck for travellers going north from the rest of the United Kingdom. So the failure for this situation is hardly surprising because the SNP government's record when it comes to transport infrastructure is not good, Presiding Officer. We have had countless road projects which have been left stuck in the slow lane by the SNP government, and this continues to be one of them. The Scottish Government have failed to upgrade important roads like the A720, the A75, the A96 and the A9 in my own region. Elsewhere, the A83, the rest, and be thankful, is still facing disruption. So this is a pattern that we see time and time again by this SNP government. All of these projects require to be looked at. All of these projects want to be seen what's happening, but are not being delivered. Christine, happy to do so.
I agree with a lot of it, but we did build a third bridge over the Forth. We have built the Borders Railway after decades of dither and delay by the UK. So while I'm prepared to criticise my government, I don't think they've not done anything at all that's worthwhile in transport. That's very unfair.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank the member for the intervention, and I acknowledge, but when you're in government, you're there to provide as much as you can for the whole of the community, not just parts of the community, Ms Cribb. The Sheriffhall Roundabout has become a saga that has been disappointed, and it's had broken promises again and again and again. We know that nearly 2 years since the independent report has submitted recommendations to the Scottish ministers, we're still tied up in bureaucracy. The debate has clear cross-party support, and action is required. And I only hope that the Scottish Government is willing to listen, Presiding Officer. So in conclusion, progress on Sheriffhall is long overdue. It's time for the SNP to stop sitting back and waiting. They need to deliver for what this Parliament wants to do, even if that means dragging them kicking and screaming to do the right decision, because the right decision is to sort this roundabout for the communities it represents.
Thank you, Mr Stewart. And I call on Fiona Hislop to respond to the debate around 7 minutes. Cabinet Secretary.
President Officer, I'd like to thank Miles Briggs for raising this issue, and by the constructive way in which he did so. I think his case has been somewhat destroyed by Alexander Stewart, and not acknowledging the investment and the support the Scottish Government has given very successfully to considerable road projects, not least the Queensferry crossing, the Aberdeen peripheral route, the M8 Wraith interchange, the fact that we now have short, medium and long-term developments being prepared for the A83, the investments in the A77 and the A75. So it doesn't help his case to try and persuade me to respond in a constructive way when he hijacks what I thought was a reasonably articulated case being put by other members in this chamber for something that we need to consider in the round and following due process. So, Presiding Officer, I have listened very carefully to the range of points raised during the course of the debate today, and I want to start by reassuring members of this Government's commitment to improving transport infrastructure across the country, including Edinburgh and the south east of Scotland, building on our strong delivery record. Notably, 2025 marks 10 years since the Borders Railway line was reopened by this Government after being closed for nearly 50 years. It increased accessibility, economic growth and social benefits to the region. Additionally, 17 years ago, this Government completed construction of the nearby Dalkeith bypass, bringing relief to towns and settlements along that route. And, Presiding Officer, I would also like to reassure members that I am fully aware of the challenges and frustrations facing all users at this Sheriffhall junction, and have often made the journey along the city bypass through the Sheriffhall roundabout. And the standard of the Sheriffhall junction has always been out of step with the rest of the Edinburgh City bypass, as Miles Briggs has pointed out. It is the only single-level junction on the bypass. This was a consequence of the complexities of an underlying geological fault and historical mine workings, which led to the choice of a roundabout at that time of construction in place of the grade-separated junctions used elsewhere on the bypass. Transport Scotland undertook a review of the junction following the opening of the Dalkeith bypass. This work, together with stakeholder input, highlighted a number of challenges in the operation of the existing junction. And the first Strategic Transport Projects Review, published in 2008, confirmed this position and the need for improvements to the Sheriffhall junction. As the project has been taken forward, as we heard from Faisal Chowdhury and others, through the Edinburgh South East Scotland City Region deal, and because it arose from the first Strategic Transport Projects Review, the scheme itself was not considered within the scope of the second Strategic Transport Projects Review appraisal. And while the STBR2 recommendations represent a repositioning of our wider transport investment priorities, with a focus firmly on how transport can help us protect our climate and improve lives while supporting the economy, there are still road improvement interventions recommended by the review. And the most transformative of the review's recommendations for the region is the development of a mass transit system for Edinburgh and the south east of Scotland. This recommends an enhanced cross-boundary public transport system, potentially comprising tram, bus, rapid transit and bus priority measures, not least for the constituents of Christine Graham, in terms of looking at the position in the borders. Christine Graham.
Christine Graham.
Thank you very much. This may be left field, but I've never understood why the park and ride is on the north side of the Sheriffhall roundabout and not on the south side, so people park their cars there and don't have to go round that roundabout to park and ride before they go into Edinburgh. It's not the same at the Pennycook end, where that's on the south side of the road. Perhaps the Cabinet Secretary hasn't got an answer to that, but I'd like to know if that could be changed.
Cabinet Secretary.
I think the member makes an important point. This is where I say this was before my time, so I think I'll move on at this point. But I think the logic of what she's saying makes a lot of sense, so we'll try and see what can be addressed in the future. So I recognise that improvements at Sheriffhall are a priority for regional partners, road users and local residents, in addition to the recommendations within STBR2. The proposed improvements at Sheriffhall would provide a significant strategic contribution to the Edinburgh and South East Scotland City Region Deal themes, including accelerating inclusive growth, removing physical barriers to growth and targeted employability and skills interventions. It would also provide opportunities for greater levels of movement by public transport and also, as we heard from Christine Graham and others, for pedestrians and cyclists who will be able to traverse the junction more safely. Now, while these benefits may be understood, we must also recognise that there are other views and that there is a statutory process to be followed under which ministers have decision-making responsibilities, which are separate from their responsibilities as a promoter. Following publication of draft orders, Transport Scotland received, as we heard, 2,773 objections to the proposed scheme. As Transport Scotland was unable to resolve all objections received, a public local inquiry was held from the 31st of January to the 8th of February 2023, during which an appointed independent reporter heard evidence from objectors and Transport Scotland. Following consideration of objections received, the reporter submitted her conclusions and recommendations to the Scottish Government on the 10th of October 2023, and this remains under active consideration by my officials. Sue Webber.
Sue Webber.
Of those objections, 97% have been identified as coming from Green Party sources, but yet they only make up 12% of the voting population as of the Lothian at that point. Do you think it's fair that they are...
Through the chair.
Do you believe, Cabinet Secretary, that it's fair that the party has hijacked this process?
Cabinet Secretary.
So you is the presiding officer, and I acknowledge that. I think it's important she puts that on the record, but I'm not going to give a judgment on that. It is only right that my officials take the appropriate time to consider the significant number of objections received, along with the conclusions and recommendations made by the reporter prior to providing advice to ministers. So I continue to await advice on this matter from my officials, and while I am keen to see progress made, it is essential that we follow due process. Not doing so is a risk itself. The statutory right for individuals and organisations to have their say in proposals and the need for ministers to take these matters into account in reaching a final determination cannot be set aside, as some have been suggesting. Now, Sheriffhall is being promoted by Transport Scotland on behalf of Scottish ministers seeking to make road orders under the Road Scotland Act 1984 and to acquire land under the Acquisition of Land Act 1947. The Road Scotland Act, under which this scheme is being promoted, requires me, as the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, to make a decision at the end of this statutory process. There was an excess of 1,200 pieces of evidence lodged for this public local inquiry. This needs rigorous scrutiny from technical and legal advisers, who also must be separate from those who have been involved in the promotion of the project. This is a time-consuming process, but it is necessary to ensure robust and well-reasoned decision-making. Nonetheless, I am very sympathetic to the frustrations at the length of time this process is taking. But it is just not possible at this moment in time to give you the timeline you understandably want.
Miles Briggs.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for taking this intervention, and I know if this had progressed as part of the City deal, this summer we would be opening the upgraded roundabout. But there is concern beyond that Transport Scotland are not engaging with the City deal partnership. Can I ask whether or not she will instruct them to attend their meetings in the future? Because they haven't been. And I know that is frustrating the people who are actually actively working on this project.
Cabinet Secretary, give the time back.
I wasn't aware that they had been invited and they hadn't attended. Obviously, there's a difference between the promoters and those that are advising me on this, and it is something I will actively look into. In summary, Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government continues to support the promotion of the grade separation of Sheriffhall Roundabout as part of its £300 million commitment to the Edinburgh and South East Scotland City Region deal. I recognise that it is a priority for regional partners, and my officials continue to progress the proposed scheme through the statutory authorisation process. And when it is appropriate, recognising due process, I will meet a cross-party group of MSPs interested in this very important development, as I am fully aware of your interest on behalf of your constituents, as expressed in this debate tonight.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes the debate, and I close this meeting of Parliament.